Welcome to another episode of What Works for Me, a podcast about the great things happening in our Lutheran schools and the people that serve in them. This podcast is hosted in partnership with LEA. To learn more about the work LEA is doing to support Lutheran educators and Lutheran schools, please visit lea.org. My name is Rob Lunak, and I'm the superintendent of Lutheran neighborhood schools in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My co-host Mike Sheeman, I think, given the time of recording, is in Cancun somewhere. So we're going to record this one without him, but I'm sure he's enjoying his time there in the surf and the sand. And today on the podcast, we have Laura Piel with us. Laura is the middle school reading and language arts teacher and also 7th grade homeroom teacher at Trinity Roselle. Why don't you introduce yourself?
So thank you for having me on the podcast. Like Rob said, I have been reading and language arts teacher for the past 14 years. I was down in Tinley Park for the first 8 years of my career and then moved on up to Roselle, just a little farther north. And during that time, I've also run a theater program at both schools, which is what I'm really excited to talk about today.
Yeah, when Denise kind of sent your name over, she said, hey, Laura's doing this thing. She writes plays for the kids to perform. And I know a lot of our schools, they'll do operettas or they'll do maybe a fall play. And they buy those a lot of the time. But you've said, no, I'm going to make them. So why don't you explain how that started and what that looks like now?
Yeah, so I started off doing, and I'm glad you mentioned the word operetta because that's what I started out doing when I was at Tinley Park and they hired me. They said, oh, hey, you have a theater background and we have someone retiring and we'd love for you to move in and take over the operetta, which was for grades 4 through 6 at the time. They did choir together. So they always did the big Lutheran school operetta that I know a lot of us did growing up. And so I did buy shows the first few years. The first one I did was Alice in Wonderland, which was through MTI, Music Theater International. And I liked doing it a lot. It is very expensive. Those of you out there know if you buy a show, it's probably a good $600 just to get like the scripts and the rights and all of the copyright things to be able to promote. So I did two of those shows, one through Pioneer Drama, which was a little cheaper. And then I was able to move up and do the middle school show. And I've been looking and trying to buy a show, and I couldn't find anything that I thought was good for the kids I knew who would be auditioning. So I was on Pinterest one day and I found a pin and I thought, oh, that's such a cool image. That would make such a fun story. So I think it was over Thanksgiving weekend, I sat and I wrote a show. And I said, this would be great for these kids. And I love to write. And so I told the kids what we'd be doing. And they were like, that is so cool. You wrote this. And that was the first show I wrote back in 2016. It was called Dr. Adler Presents His Amazing Wind Up Doll. And it had a big twist at the end. And from there, I was like, this is what I always want to do. And there's so many great reasons why to write a show, which I'll get into, but it's also a leap of faith because I had many moments where I thought, if nobody likes this, that's all me. I wrote it. If they think it's weird or the storyline is odd, but it was a big leap of faith, and my students and families there connected with it. And so I just kept doing it for the past 8 years now.
Well, it sounds like it went well. You're still doing it, obviously.
Yes.
Now, have you ever thought of like, hey, this other company charges 600. I'll write you a play for $50. It's one I already have.
I have thought of that. My brother, who teaches in the public schools, actually used the radio show that I wrote during COVID. So the play that we were supposed to do obviously got canceled. The students were still very interested. They needed an outlet. We were all stuck at home. So I wrote a radio show. My brother did that. He thought it was really fun. I've thought about it. I just haven't had like kind of the means or the platform to do that. But I think if the Lutheran schools can all get together and we can have our own, little site, I think that would be something great to do. I know that Andy Peterson, who was a professor at Concordia, really big into theater. A lot of you probably know him. He talked about doing something similar. So maybe in the future.
There you go. We'll keep an eye out for that.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that process kind of from start to finish. So you have this idea, you start writing a play. What goes into that?
So the biggest thing that I think about when I sit down to write, ideally during the summer, doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's 2 weeks before the students audition. But I think about the students first. And I think any theater program, whether you buy a show or write a show, the best thing to do is to think about who are the students who you think will be auditioning, who you hope will be auditioning, kind of playing to their strengths. One big thing I always think about are the oldest students, eighth graders who will be graduating. What are their talents you want to highlight? What do the numbers look like? Do you think you'll have more boys than girls, more girls than boys? How do you kind of build parts that could, be I write a lot of parts that's like this part, the character's name is Alex. That could be Alex Alexander. It could be Alex Alexandra. So you kind of think, how can you also be creative in your casting? Because there have been a lot of times where you anticipate certain things and it changes. So the second thing is kind of flexibility, saying, how can I write very flexible parts where, say, it's a family that has two children. Those two children could easily be split into three. You could take the child with the most amount of lines, and those are the kinds of things that are great about writing your own show. You can add characters, you can remove characters. There have been times where I've taken two bigger roles and split them more into four, or take two smaller roles and, oh, we had one less kid audition, so combine them. So thinking about flexibility in numbers is really big, because when you buy a show, in my experience, you're kind of more locked into, it's a cast of 25. It's a little bit harder to stretch it. Then you also have to, this is the hardest part, think about timing. When you buy a show, the company knows it's 90 minutes. It's harder to sit down and write your own show and say, "Okay, how long is this?" So, something I did this past year that helped a lot was I had the, Microsoft Word program read it back to me, and I timed it. So that was super helpful, but you start to learn like, okay, this many pages is about 75 minutes. So it's really, you start with the students and then you kind of go from there. And mostly you do comedies, because when parents come to the school gym on a Friday night, they want to laugh. They don't want to cry. For younger students, especially, they want to be entertained. So you also think about the audience too.
Well, it sounds like there's a ton that goes into that, and you've definitely
Yes,
been
there
been
is.
honing that craft over the last 8 years, right? Now, what has changed in that 8 years? Are they more elaborate now? Have you simplified things from where you started to where you currently sit? What is the difference?
That's a great question, and a lot of it depends on the help that you have. So when I was at Tinley Park, we did not have a stage. We did them in the gym, and we had to build up a stage in like the 3 or 4 weeks before. So you plan that show based on, you're limited by, do you have a stage? Do you have a curtain that you can close on that stage? Are you practicing in a space you have to share with the basketball team, or with, another sports team, or even maybe another extracurricular? So I think the biggest thing that's changed is, who are the people who can help me? Because that changes year to year. Sometimes you have a year with parents who are really into the set building, the painting, the costumes. You have people who can sew things for you. That's huge. Then you can do more elaborate costumes. Do you have someone who can really do great makeup? So, what's changed the most for me, I think, is seeking out those people ahead of time, and then you write kind of within those boundaries. I've bought pre-made kind of backdrops before. Amazon has great ones, and then you can use a staple gun and put them up, or Velcro, and that's really easy. But if you have someone who is like, "Hey, I can paint this for you," then you go that route. So I think the biggest thing that's changed is just knowing the help that's available and really relying on them, because, as you said, it's a tremendous amount of work to put on a theater production. And if you try to do it yourself, it's not going to happen. So I think some advice I'd give, and what I keep in mind, is find the people who can help you, rely on their talents, be willing to say the way you do it is great, even if it doesn't match the exact vision in my head, because volunteer help is, it's invaluable. You have to have that to make any theater production work.
Yeah, definitely true. I remember those days. The calls
Mhm.
at 10 o'clock. Hey, show's tomorrow. We need to finish this thing. Definitely remember.
Yes. Or saying, I tried this for the set and it didn't work. That happened to me, I think, 3 years ago. The way that it was in my head didn't work, and I hadn't called for help early enough. And I had so many people who said, "Hey, next time, put out this email earlier." And that was a very valuable lesson, just
Mhm.
to remind myself, there are people out there, you have to find them first.
Yeah. I love how how effectively personal to your place you've made it. You write the scripts based on which kids you're going to have, which kids might audition, how many you're going to have in a cast, and then you also play into that what parents you have, what resources you have. So unlike any other show a school can buy where they go, okay, well, we might need to do this, maybe we can't have this, maybe we got to scratch this. I feel like this almost might make the process of putting a show on a little easier in a sense. Is that true?
It does. I think one of the most one of the things it makes the easiest is the flexibility is huge. This past year, I think I had about 38 students audition for the spring play, and the script originally only had like 29 cast members. So it was great to be able to email parents and say, we want everyone to be involved. I don't believe in cutting students from a cast because I want them to have the experience, even if they don't love it, even if they say this isn't for me, they've tried it. So being able to email them and say, hey, I need another 3 or 4 days to send out the cast list because I have to add new characters. The parents enjoy that. They like seeing that, hey, there is a spot for everyone. And some of those students, then you get to say, hey, I wrote this for you. I saw your audition and I thought of this new character. That's really fun to do. And like you said, it makes it easier to be able to say to parents, there is no template for this. This is a brand new show. If you have a great idea for the set, we'll do whatever you want to do. I have no like preconceived notions or there's no precedent set for this. You get to set that precedent. And it makes it so much easier to be able to say, if we need to change something, we can change it. There's no copyright we need to follow. We can film this, and if you want to, get a DVD of this, we don't have to pay that extra cost. So just the cost saving it's tremendous. It's so expensive to put on a show. And when you eliminate the need to pay for any sort of copyright, that in and of itself makes it so much easier.
There's so many great things there. There's so many great things from how personal it is, how flexible you can be, cost savings. I can just imagine you in rehearsal being like, let me ask the author. Yeah, that's fine. We can change it. I think that's great.
Yeah, and that gives the students an opportunity too. They can come to you and say, "Hey, can we change this?" And you can be like, "Yep, let's do it." We added a page once. I don't remember what show it was, but we printed out a new page because they said, "Oh, can we add this to it?" And we did. And that was the students. It's really collaborative. I love giving the students a voice, having them they do a lot of the backstage work. We have a dedicated stage crew and they attend rehearsals from about 2 or 3 weeks in, and they decide, how do you want to do this? How can it look? How fast can you do it? It's just giving the students, I think, a lot of the ownership is huge. Having them be able to say, I did that. We do set painting with the students. They help with the set building. That's something I learned from my high school theater director. He said it's so important to have ownership. When the parents and when the students feel that, it makes a huge difference.
There's so many great takeaways there. Now, if somebody's listening, they're doing it the traditional way. They have the operetta they buy. Some of them, they're probably looking through old ones they've already purchased every year.
Hmm.
They're listening to all this and they hear 75 minutes, 90 minutes, write all these pages, 36 kids in a cast, make all the backdrops, and maybe they're going, that sounds like something I could never do. What advice would you give to that person if they were going to start tomorrow? Where would they start to kind of work their way down this process?
I would say start simple. When I did Alice in Wonderland that first time, that was back in 2013, I'd never directed a big show before ever. So I found a script that I felt comfortable with. That if we needed to rent costumes, we could have rented costumes. That's the thing. If you start with something that you know you can find other resources for, contact other schools even and say, hey, we want to do a show. Do you have things we could borrow? Do you have a show that you maybe have props for or costumes for? Reaching out to other schools is also huge because there can be so much sharing across Lutheran schools or even public schools in the area. I've done that before. And then finding out your help first before you commit to anything. Go to your colleagues, go to your parents and say, we want to do this. What are your gifts and talents that you can bring to the table? I found parents who could do face painting, which in Alice in Wonderland was a big deal because there's lots of animals and creatures. And so parents who could do that, having parents approach me and say, hey, what do you want for costumes? I can find those for you. People are willing to donate things a lot, which is always amazing. Finding your help, starting with something simple, reaching out to other schools, and don't reinvent the wheel. When I did Alice in Wonderland, we found like a pre-made backdrop, and then we had a parent at the time who was an artist professionally, and she said, "Hey, don't spend the money. Send me that picture. We can kind of like do something similar." So the biggest thing is to just find people who can do things for you and say, "You do it. Whatever you do is going to be great," and then focus on the things that you want to do, that you know that you can do well. So make it a collaboration, and then that also makes parents feel very invested, and it helps it's community building at the end of the day. I think is the really cool thing about theater and music and any of the arts is just building that community with parents and with students and even congregation members. Put something in the church bulletin or in the weekly newsletter or up on your website and say, "Hey, we'd love your help." People come out of the woodwork. It's amazing. It's such a wonderful way to also connect the church and the school in a really meaningful way. I've always found that to be true.
Well, Laura, there's a lot of great advice there. I want to thank you for taking the time out to talk to us on the podcast today. If somebody's listening and they want to contact you with other questions, is it okay if we include your email?
Absolutely. I would love for people to reach out.
Well, perfect. Why don't we close with prayer? Thank you again for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Dear Lord, thank you for Laura. Thank you for the theater program that she's built there and for the volunteers that she's empowered there. Thank you for the students that she serves and the school she serves. Please be with her as she continues through the rest of her summer and continue to bless all future productions that she does and allow those to point to you and to your son. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.